Okay, so one of the best ways to refute the idea that Jesus is God is that Jesus himself has a God. So if Jesus has a God, he cannot be co-equal with God or God himself. We read in Matthew chapter 27, verse 46, Jesus says, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, when he's crucified. So Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? So Jesus has a God, or Jesus is crying out to a God who's higher than him, who's greater than him. So that means that Jesus cannot be co-equal with God. We further read in John chapter 20, verse 17. This is another verse that proves that there's no Trinity and Jesus is not God, because Jesus says, Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not ascended to the Father, but instead go to my brothers and tell them I am ascending to my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God." So the context of this is when Jesus comes back after the crucifixion to Mary Magdalene, he says, "Go instead to my brothers and tell them I am ascending to my Father and or I am ascending to your Father and your God." So Jesus is saying to Mary Magdalene that I am ascending to the same God as the disciples, as Mary Magdalene's God, as the disciples' God. So Jesus is saying that he has a God, and that God that Jesus has is the same God the disciples have and Mary Magdalene have, because that's what John chapter 20 verse 17 is saying. Jesus says, uh, my Jesus is saying my God and your God. So that means Jesus has a God. Therefore, Jesus cannot be co-equal with God or in the same essence as that God, because he has a God. And if someone has a God, that means that God is greater in essence than that person. So Jesus has the same God as disciples. As a disciples God, Jesus' God is the same God as a disciples' God and Mary Magdalene's God. Further, we read in Revelation 3:2. So Jesus says he has a God. He says, unfinished in the sight of my God. So Jesus has a God, even according to, or the supposed divine Jesus, after Jesus ascends to the right hand of God. Jesus has a God after he ascends to God. Therefore, Jesus has a God even in heaven. Even in his divine state, Jesus has a God. So if Jesus has a God, he cannot be co-equal with God, and he cannot. And if Jesus is saying in the Gospel of John, chapter 20, verse 17, that his God is the same as the disciples, he has the same God as his disciples. That means Jesus has the same God as us, and therefore Jesus's God is the same God as our God, and Jesus cannot be co-equal or part of the Trinity as that God, because the Trinity is the Father is co-equal with the Son is co-equal with the Holy Spirit is co-equal with the Father, and these three are one. But Jesus is admitting that he's not co-equal with God, because Jesus is saying that he has a God. Therefore, John, the Gospel of John disproves, or the Gospel of John chapter 20 verse 17 disproves the Trinity, and it disproves Jesus being God. So these would be the three verses. There are many other verses that disprove that Jesus is God, but these are the three main verses that I would use against Trinitarians to show that Jesus has a God and Jesus cannot be co-equal with that God. Therefore, the doctrine of the Trinity can be refuted or proven false, given given the verses from the New Testament, and the Trinity can be proven false, given the words of Jesus and what Jesus says about God, because Jesus has a God. Therefore, Jesus cannot be co-equal with that God. Stay tuned. More videos coming up ahead.